Today we're looking at lesson 2.2 on adding integers. To add integers, and if they have the same sign, meaning they're both positive or they're both negative, you add their absolute values. So what I mean by absolute value is whatever number or distance the number is from 0. So if I were to say add negative 5 plus negative 2, the absolute value of negative 5 is 5, and the absolute value of negative 2 is 2. So I'm going to be adding 5 plus 2. And then if they have the same sign, you're going to keep the sign that they both have for your answer. So my answer would be negative 7. So the sum is positive if both of the integers are positive, and the sum is negative if both of the integers are negative, similar to the example I just gave you. So if you have different signs with your integers, you would subtract their absolute values. So if I were to have negative 5 plus 2, I would still take the absolute value of 5, or negative 5, which is 5, and the absolute value of 2, which is 2, and I would subtract to get 3. And then what I would have to decide is what the symbol would be, whether it was negative or positive 3. So I look back at the numbers, and the higher absolute value was from negative 5, and it was a negative. So my answer should be negative. So my answer here would be negative 3. And again, to reiterate that, the sum is positive if the positive integer's absolute value is greater, and negative if the negative integer's absolute value is greater, similar to what I just showed you. Just to keep in mind, if you have the sum of any number and its additive inverse, which means opposite, so such as 5 plus negative 5, the result is always 0. And that is called the additive inverse property, but you just need to remember when you add opposites, you get 0. So we're going to do a few practice ones. So negative 3 plus negative 4. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. The absolute value of negative 4 is 4. They have the same sign, so we're going to add to get 7. And we're going to take the same sign that they both have, which is negative. So my answer is negative 7. Then I go to the next one. These are all examples where they have both of them as negative. So my answer for all of these is going to be negative. But I'm going to take the absolute value of negative 6 and the absolute value of 14 for this next problem, and I'd add 6 plus 14, and it's going to be negative 20 instead of positive 20 because they were both negative integers. Then you have one more, negative 7, the absolute value of that is 7, negative 2, the absolute value of that is 2, so we add that to get 9, and again it is negative 9 because both of the numbers are negative. Then you have negative 8 plus negative 2. This is another example like the ones we just did. So the absolute value of negative 8 is 8, the absolute value of negative 2 is 2. Add that together, we get 10, and it is negative 10 because both are negative. And then the last one, negative 1, the absolute value is 1. Oops. The absolute value of negative 12 is 12. We add that, and again put a negative sign because both are negative. Here we have examples where one is positive and one is negative. So if we have a positive and a negative integer, we're going to subtract the absolute values. So the absolute value of 5 is 5. The absolute value of 2, or negative 2, is 2. So we're subtracting 5 minus 2 to get 3. And the higher absolute value is positive, or the higher number absolute value is positive 5, so our answer is going to be positive 3. Again, we take the absolute value of negative 8, which is 8. The absolute value of 4 is 4. Since they have different signs, we would subtract them to get 4. And the higher absolute values number was negative, so my answer is negative 4. Again, we have the absolute value of negative 20 is 20, plus the absolute value of, oops, I'm doing this incorrectly, it should be minus, because we have different signs. The absolute value of 4 is 4, so we get 16. And then the higher absolute value sign was 20, or negative 20, so my answer is negative 16. And again, 16, we take the absolute value is 16, subtract that from the absolute value of negative 5, which is 5. That gives us 11. And the higher absolute value sign is positive, so 16 is the higher number. It was positive, so my answer is positive. Here we have a combination of a few. What I would do when I have something like this where you have more than 2 numbers, you need to take it 2 by 2. So I'm going to start with any 2 numbers. Because of the commutative property, I can switch around the order here. So I could start with the 2 negatives, and we take the absolute value of them. Since they're the same sign, we take the absolute value of them and add them to get 9, but we keep the sign, so negative 9. And then I would rewrite what I have left over. So now I have 4 plus negative 9, and I need to do that problem. So I do, since they're different signs, I take the absolute value of both, and I subtract them. So 9 minus 4. And then I take the 5, and I see which one had the higher absolute value, which was negative 9. Since it was negative, my answer is negative 5. And I do the same thing with the next one. I would group the 2 positives and the 2 negatives together, since they have similar rules. So negative 10 plus negative 7, we could do first. We take the absolute value and the absolute value, add it together, and take the same sign. So I have negative 17 now. I could add the 3 plus the 12. They're both positive, so I can just add them normal to get 15. And my final answer is going to be what negative 17 plus 15 is. And I would take the higher absolute value. I'd have to subtract them. And the higher absolute value was negative 17, so I would have a negative 2 as my answer. One more problem where we have a real-world situation, and we need to describe it with integers. So this is saying a scuba diver is 120 feet below the water surface. The word below is going to tell you that 120 should be represented with a negative. Then we go to the next sentence. She then ascends 83 feet. Ascends means goes up, so we need to keep that as a positive 83. And what is her current depth? Well, we need to write an addition equation and solve. So we're going to add these two, and then we need to find their solution. So we take the absolute value of negative 120, which is 120, absolute value of 83, which is 83. We subtract them because they're different signs, and we get 120 minus 83, which gives us 37. That's not right. Which is 47. Oh no, it's 37. Sorry about that. And then we take the higher absolute values sign, which was negative 120, so our answer is negative 37. So she's at a depth of negative 37 feet. And that concludes lesson 2-2 on adding integers.